Emily Harris was born into a patriarchal family where gender determined value more than anything else. Her parents, especially her mother, followed the age-old traditions where the son was the crown jewel and the daughter, well, she was just there to help. Growing up in a modest suburban home in Pennsylvania, Emily quickly realized that, despite being the eldest child, she would never quite measure up to her younger brother Jack. From a young age, Emily's parents focused all their attention on her brother Jack. He received new clothes, toys, and praise, while she got hand-me-downs and little recognition. Emily was expected to quietly support the family, doing chores, babysitting, and running errands, while Jack played and excelled in school. Her dreams of going to college seemed impossible, as her parents made it clear that Jack's future mattered more. At 17, Emily was told she had to abandon her dreams to support the family. Despite juggling part-time jobs, her parents insisted that her priority was staying home, as her brother Jack's future was considered more important. Emily was expected to sacrifice her education and freedom, her whole life conditioned to prioritize others. But Emily wasn't ready to give up on her aspirations. Determined not to miss out on her education, she pushed herself even harder, trying to balance the weight of responsibility with the desire to succeed. The next few years were a blur of exhaustion. Emily worked long hours at multiple jobs to cover her college costs. But no matter how hard she worked, her sacrifices were never enough. Her parents continued to expect more, using guilt to pressure her, and the burden of supporting the family never eased. As Jack moved forward with scholarships and academic success, Emily's efforts remained unappreciated, and the family continued to take from her without ever acknowledging her struggles. Emily Harris felt trapped in a never-ending cycle of pressure and responsibility. Since childhood, she was taught to be the strong one, always taking care of the family. Now, as an adult, juggling multiple jobs and college full-time, the weight had become unbearable. Despite her efforts, it never felt like enough. At 19, Emily was determined to prove she was capable of more than just being the family caretaker. But balancing work and studies took a toll. She worked as a cashier and waitress, barely scraping by, and her paycheck went straight to bills, tuition, rent, and groceries. There was no room for herself. Her parents, knowing how hard Emily worked, never eased up. They constantly guilt-tripped her, reminding her of the sacrifices they made for her. When Emily received a scholarship, her mother called it a family achievement and pressured her to use the money to pay off the debt she owed. Her father, who was not usually expressive, made it clear that he expected her to pay back the debt by using the scholarship money to help cover family expenses. "You've got that scholarship for a reason, Emily. You know what your responsibilities are," he would say. The pressure mounted as Emily saw her savings grow. She had managed to save a little over $2,000 after a year of sacrifice. It wasn't much, but it was hers. The idea of having money for the first time in her life, something that wasn't tied to an obligation, felt freeing. It was the one thing that made her feel like she had control over her own life. But as soon as her parents found out, that sense of freedom quickly faded. "You've been saving money. How nice," her mother had said when Emily mentioned it casually one evening. "Well, your father and I have some things we need help with. You know how much we've given you over the years. It's time to pay that back." Emily's heart sank. She tried to explain that the money was for her future, for emergencies, for something she had worked hard for. But her mother's sharp tone cut through her reasoning. "Your future. Don't forget who gave you that chance. Without us, you wouldn't be where you are. We've supported you this whole time. Now it's your turn to support us." It was the same old routine. Emily was constantly reminded that everything she had, everything she was working toward, was thanks to her parents. And no matter how much she gave, it would never be enough. The tension in the family grew as Emily's success became more apparent. Jack, her younger brother, had never had to work for anything. He was the golden child, the one who excelled in school with little effort, the one who was always showered with praise and love. When he graduated from high school, he was given a brand new car, a gift from their parents, of course. Emily could barely hold back her tears when she saw Jack's new car. She had spent her teenage years walking or taking public transportation, working tirelessly to support the family. And now her brother, who had never once lifted a finger, was handed everything on a silver platter. But it didn't end there. As Jack moved on to college, Emily watched as her parents threw all their resources into supporting him. Every time Jack called with a new need, a new laptop, a new textbook, a new set of clothes, it was never questioned. But when Emily mentioned that she needed help paying for her books or asked for a little extra money for food, the answer was always the same. "We've already given you enough. Don't ask for more." Jack, completely unaware of the sacrifices Emily had made, acted as if he was entitled to everything. He would call her occasionally, but only when he needed something: money, favors, or just someone to listen to his complaints about school. Emily didn't mind listening, but she hated the way he never seemed to realize how much she was struggling. He was focused on his own life, oblivious to the fact that Emily had given up her own future to make sure his was secure. One day, after receiving a call from Jack asking her to lend him money for a last-minute trip, Emily broke down. She sat in her room, alone, and cried for what felt like hours. Why was she still supporting him? Why did he get everything without asking for it, while she had to fight for every little thing? Why couldn't she live her life on her own terms? The next few months became overwhelming for Emily. Juggling school, work, and family demands began to take a heavy emotional toll. She missed classes, struggled to focus, and her once excellent grades started to slip. Every small victory she had was quickly turned into another obligation by her parents, leaving her stuck in a cycle of guilt and resentment. Despite her exhaustion, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that her family still needed her, but she realized that no matter how much she gave, it was never enough. Sitting late one evening, staring at her bank statement, Emily saw the truth. She had worked tirelessly, sacrificing her own needs and dreams, yet was still trapped. Her family always expected more, and her mother, in particular, pressured her to use her hard-earned savings to support them. Even as Emily struggled to keep up with everything, it was clear Emily had nothing left to give. That night, her phone rang again. Her mother, as usual, demanding money. Emily had just paid her own bills, scraped together enough for her next semester's books, and covered her basic needs. She couldn't give more, not anymore. She was tired. But as the phone call ended, her mother's words echoed in her mind, as they always did. "You owe us, Emily. We've given you everything. How could you forget that?" She set the phone down with trembling hands and sat in the dim light of her room. The walls felt smaller. The weight of expectation was suffocating. Emily realized, with a shock that made her stomach churn, that no matter what she did, it would never be enough. No amount of work, sacrifice, or love would ever satisfy her family's demands. They would always expect more, always treat her as a tool for their own convenience. No matter how much she gave, they would never see her as a person. They only saw her as a means to an end. The thought hit her like a freight train, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the weight of that truth fully. She had been running on fumes for so long, trying to prove her worth to a family that would never understand or appreciate her sacrifices. Her entire life had been shaped by their needs and expectations, and for the first time, she saw clearly that it was destroying her. Emily was giving everything: her health, her dreams, her future, just to meet their endless demands. And in return, she was met with more guilt, more demands, and more emotional manipulation. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw everything she had worked for away and tell her parents where they could stick their guilt trips. But instead, she sat there, her head in her hands, fighting back tears. She felt like she was suffocating under the weight of it all. This wasn't just a family problem. This was a problem that ran deep into her very core. She had allowed herself to be defined by their needs, by their expectations. It wasn't just her family that was toxic. It was her belief that she had to give everything to them, no matter the cost. That was when Emily made her decision. It wasn't a single moment of clarity. It was a culmination of years of hurt, exhaustion, and the slow realization that she could no longer live this way. It was the moment she finally said to herself, "No more. No more sacrificing herself. No more living under the shadow of guilt. No more bending to their will." But even as she made the decision, Emily felt the sharp sting of guilt. How could she walk away? How could she leave her parents behind when they had done so much for her? Or so they claimed. The conflict inside her was overwhelming. She had been raised with the belief that family always came first, that her own dreams and well-being should be sacrificed for the good of others. Leaving them felt like betrayal, an unthinkable act. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the ache in her chest that had been growing for years, the feeling that she had no life of her own, that her entire existence had been reduced to serving the needs of her family. The decision wasn't easy. Emily spent several sleepless nights weighing her options, each one feeling like a heavy burden. She had spent her whole life trying to please her parents, trying to be the perfect daughter. She had sacrificed everything for them, even her own happiness. And yet, they were never satisfied. The love and approval she craved from them would never come. She knew, deep down, that it was time to break free. The first steps toward freedom were terrifying for Emily. She took control of her finances by opening a new bank account, transferring her savings there, an empowering move. Then she made the difficult decision to cut ties with her parents, refusing their calls, messages, and demands. She set boundaries she had never set before, and though the guilt was overwhelming, Emily knew it was the only way to reclaim her life. As time passed, she began to appreciate the emotional space she had created for herself. For the first time in years, Emily felt like she could breathe again. She focused on her studies, her work, and building a career. She realized that her worth wasn't tied to fulfilling others' expectations, especially those of a family that had never supported her. Though the road ahead was tough, Emily had taken the first step toward living on her own terms. Finally, she felt in control of her own life. After Emily broke free from her family, she felt a sense of relief for the first time. She focused on her career, creating a YouTube channel called The New Life, to express herself and share her journey of escaping a toxic family dynamic. Though she had no formal training in videography or editing, she was determined. She practiced every day, and her channel slowly took shape. At first, her audience was small, but as Emily shared her story with honesty and vulnerability, her following grew. People resonated with her realness and the challenges of setting boundaries and living for herself. Despite fears of judgment and retaliation from her family, Emily continued to push forward, inspired by the support from her growing community. Her videos helped viewers take the first steps toward setting their own boundaries and chasing their dreams. While there were still emotional struggles and moments of doubt, Emily found strength in therapy and reflection. She learned to embrace her true self, accept her imperfections, and celebrate her victories. As her YouTube career flourished, Emily's confidence grew, and she finally felt like she was thriving, no longer just surviving. The months after Emily's decision to leave her family were filled with the promise of peace, but that peace was always threatened by the ghosts of her past. Her mother's calls, although less frequent, still echoed in the back of her mind, always looming. Emily had hoped that over time her family would accept her decision, or at the very least, stop trying to control her. But that was not to be the case. It began subtly at first. Her mother would send her occasional texts, the kind that seemed innocuous at first. "How are you, Emily? You never visit anymore. We miss you. You can't just leave everything behind." They were the same kind of manipulative messages Emily had grown used to over the years, ones that made her feel as though she owed them something, that her own needs came second. But these attempts didn't work anymore. Emily had long since stopped feeling guilty every time her mother threw a guilt trip at her. She had learned to set boundaries, and now she had learned to ignore her mother's pleas. But then things took a darker turn. One evening, as Emily was preparing for an important live stream on her YouTube channel, she received a call from an unknown number. When she picked up, it was her mother's voice on the other end. "Emily, you need to come home. Your father has been hospitalized. He's not doing well, and you're the only one who can help." Her mother's voice was laced with panic, and the words hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. Her father's health had always been a source of concern, but the sudden urgency in her mother's tone left her feeling torn. At first, Emily felt the old familiar tug of guilt. She had spent so many years playing the role of the dutiful daughter, and now her father was sick. Could she really turn her back on him, especially when he needed her? But as she paused, a bitter realization washed over her. The same pattern was repeating itself. Her mother had always known how to manipulate her emotions, playing on her sense of duty to get what she wanted. Emily had learned that lesson the hard way. She couldn't go back. Not now. Not when she had worked so hard to break free. "Mom, I can't come right now. I have my own commitments," Emily said, her voice steady but firm. "You and Jack can handle this." Her mother didn't take the rejection well. The pleading started, escalating into more aggressive demands. "You don't care about your family anymore. You're selfish, Emily. You'll regret this one day." Her voice cracked with emotion, but there was an edge to it. One that told Emily her mother wasn't concerned about her father's health as much as she was about getting Emily to return. The conversation ended with Emily feeling sick, but she refused to give in. She blocked her mother's number once again, determined to maintain her boundaries. She knew her mother would stop at nothing to break her down emotionally, but Emily was done. She couldn't let her family use her anymore. Yet that wasn't the end of it. Emily had just settled into her evening routine when she received a barrage of emails from Jack, her brother, who had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in their parents' eyes. This time, his tone was different, more insistent than ever. "You need to come home. Mom's a wreck. Dad is really sick. If you don't come back, I don't know how much longer we can keep this family together." The emotional manipulation wasn't subtle. It was calculated. Jack knew exactly what to say to make Emily feel like she was abandoning the family. He knew how to use their father's illness as leverage. But this time, Emily wasn't going to fall for it. She stared at the message, her hands shaking. It was one thing to deal with her mother's guilt trips, but Jack's betrayal cut deeper. He had always been the one to avoid responsibility, to take the easy way out, leaving everything to her. And now, when things were difficult, he was asking her to return and pick up the pieces. Emily took a deep breath, trying to center herself. She had worked so hard to create a life for herself, to build a community, a career that was hers alone. She wasn't going to throw it all away to be pulled back into the toxic web of family demands. With a sense of finality, she blocked Jack's emails and turned off her phone. But Jack, it seemed, wasn't finished. He resorted to more extreme measures, this time attempting to sabotage Emily's work directly. The next day, as Emily prepared for her live stream, she found her personal social media accounts flooded with angry messages, comments accusing her of abandoning her family, of being selfish, and of causing further pain to their mother. Jack had gone online and spread lies, publicly shaming her. The betrayal was cruel, and Emily felt the sting of it. She had always tried to keep her personal life separate from her work, but now her family was dragging her into the public eye, trying to ruin the small piece of peace she had worked so hard to maintain. The emotional toll was immense. Emily fought to stay calm, but the anger boiled over. For a few minutes, she felt like everything she had built was crumbling. She had come so far, and now her family was trying to tear it all down. She had spent years putting up with emotional blackmail and manipulation, and now it felt like it was happening all over again. But Emily was no longer the same person she had been when she first left. The pain brought by a patriarchal family became her strength. She had learned the value of self-care, of setting boundaries, and of protecting her peace. She called a friend to help her process the situation and decided to take action. Emily hired a social media management company to clean up the online harassment, blocking the accounts responsible for spreading lies about her. The support she received from her audience and friends was overwhelming, reminding her that she wasn't alone. Once the issue was resolved, Emily sat down and reflected on everything that had happened. She realized that her family would never understand her need for independence. They would always see her as a tool to serve their needs, and as long as she allowed that, they would continue to try to manipulate her. The hardest part of all this was realizing that Jack, the person she had always thought of as her ally, was just as toxic as her mother. He had used her own sense of responsibility against her, knowing exactly how to push her buttons to get what he wanted. But Emily knew now that she couldn't let him, or anyone else, take control of her life again. It was time to sever the ties completely. In the weeks that followed, Emily focused on rebuilding her mental and emotional well-being. She blocked all communication from her family, making it clear that she was no longer available to be manipulated. The pain was still there, but with each passing day, it grew easier to let go. She found solace in her work, in her YouTube channel, and in the supportive relationships she had built with her viewers. The final break came when Emily, after much soul-searching, wrote a letter to her parents. It wasn't a letter of anger or resentment. It was simply a letter stating that she had made the choice to no longer engage in a relationship with them, and that it was time for her to live her own life without their influence. The letter was clear, but it was final. She didn't expect them to understand, and she didn't care anymore. Emily had spent enough time trying to please them. Now she was living for herself. By the time she hit send on the letter, Emily knew that her relationship with her family was irreparably broken. This was just the beginning. Emily had saved enough from her YouTube channel and side projects to buy her own home, a cozy place where she could imagine building a future. The idea of owning a home had once felt like an unattainable dream, but now, standing in the middle of her own space, Emily realized this was another milestone in her journey of self-discovery. She didn't need luxury. What mattered was the sense of agency she had over her own life, free from the constraints of her family's expectations. One of the most profound changes, however, was her newfound freedom to travel. Emily had always wanted to explore the world, but her family's demands and financial struggles had kept her grounded. Now she could take vacations on her own terms. Her first solo trip to the mountains was life-changing. As she hiked through peaceful trails, breathing in the fresh air and taking in the stunning views, she realized it wasn't just the beauty of the scenery. It was the freedom to live life on her own terms. For the first time in years, she felt no guilt or worry about enjoying herself. Emily also began reconnecting with herself in ways she had never done before. She read books she had long postponed, took up yoga, and began cooking healthy meals. These simple joys filled her life with meaning. She was reclaiming the person she had been before family expectations, before guilt and sacrifice. It wasn't just about the external changes, like moving into her own home or traveling. It was the internal shift, the peace she found in living authentically. As she reflected on her past, Emily recognized how much her family's expectations had held her back. They had always seen her as an extension of their needs, not as an individual with her own dreams. She had spent years trying to fit into a mold that wasn't hers, but now she was free. She was no longer defined by her family's desires, and this freedom brought her peace. The greatest revelation for Emily was that she had been living someone else's life for too long. The moment she chose herself, when she realized that her happiness mattered, was the moment she truly began to live. Each day felt like a new beginning, and she became more confident in her decisions and her future. Emily's freedom didn't just come from escaping her family's control. It was also about fighting back against a society that still favored men over women. Her journey had become a fight not just for herself, but for other women too. She was determined to break the chains of gender bias and create a world where women's voices were heard, their worth was acknowledged, and their contributions were valued equally. As she sat down to record a new video for her YouTube channel, Emily spoke with unwavering conviction. She shared her story with her audience, not just about her personal journey, but also about the larger struggle many women face. She talked about the fight against patriarchy, the importance of setting boundaries, and choosing yourself over society's outdated expectations. Emily reminded her viewers, especially women who felt silenced, that they had the right to claim their place in the world. Take control of your life, Emily said, looking directly into the camera. Don't let anyone, not even your family, define who you are or what you deserve. You are worthy of love, peace, and happiness on your terms. The world may try to tell you that you are less, but you are more. Your voice matters, your presence matters, and you deserve to be heard. So take the first step. Let go of the guilt, let go of the fear, and start living the life you were meant to live. Because the time for women to thrive is now. As the video ended, Emily felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had found her voice and was using it to empower others. She knew her story wasn't unique. Many other women had faced similar struggles, fighting to prove their worth in a world that often overlooked them. But now, Emily had the power to inspire others to take that first step toward freedom. By doing so, she was not only changing her life, she was helping countless other women to rewrite their stories and challenge societal norms. The greatest revenge wasn't about holding on to anger or resentment. It was in living a life of joy, peace, and freedom. Emily had won her freedom, not just from her family, but from the suffocating expectations of patriarchy and the self-doubt that once held her captive. And now, she was living the life she had always deserved, a life where she could continue fighting for equality, lifting up other women, and paving the way for a future where gender bias no longer defined who they could be.